Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third and final part of my series, I guess now, ranking covers of Genesis songs. So we're out of the stretch of power metal covers of pop hits. We are moving finally into the realm of explicitly prog-oriented bands doing covers of the prog era. Now, this is something that's always impressive on its own terms, right? Because, this stuff isn't easy to learn or play, and it's a commitment to do. But it does also sometimes present a challenge because it's so elaborate that there's not much room for an artist to put their own stamp on how it's presented or put together. First up in that sequence is Return of the Giant Hogweed, as laid down by Transatlantic on a bonus disc for their album The Whirlwind. Now, Transatlantic are a very beloved, very respected prog rock supergroup that I don't personally listen to that much. The reason I've never really listened to them is I don't like the voice of Neil Morse, who is, arguably the kind of most defining personality of the supergroup. I don't want to dwell on that point too much because I know that he is one of the great prog rock luminaries of the last 30 years or so. But I just don't like the guy's voice. I don't like it on its own terms, and I also don't like how it has kind of, seemed to kind of create a default vocal setting for a lot of contemporary neo-prog kind of music. Leaving that aside, what Transatlantic does give us here is, as you would imagine, Return of the Giant Hogweed, played with quite a lot of verve and zest and accuracy and precision. Mike Portnoy in particular does a really good job of replicating the way that Phil's drums have a swinging energy to them while also still being intricate as hell. Still, despite a few new solos thrown in at the end, you basically still have a faithful rendition of Return of the Giant Hogweed, but with an annoying singer. It's impressive, but it's not something I can imagine seeking another round with. To Morse's credit, I do appreciate how he leads off with the same introduction that Gabriel does on the Genesis Live version of the song. That is a nice little Easter egg, and I do appreciate that attention to detail.
This is called The Return of the Giant Hogweed.
Next up is Dance on a Volcano, as taken from a solo album by the Dream Theater keyboardist Jordan Rudess. This is basically tied with Transatlantic's Hogweed being, once again, a very faithful, technically impressive cover, which adds some extra solo sections at the end, although in this case the solos are quite a bit more intricate. More has been added. Rudess seems to kind of do this thing where he'll basically play the Tony Banks solo, but in the places where Tony would normally pause, he'll do a bunch of incredibly intricate, ornate runs. Now that's impressive as a question of technique, not something that I necessarily enjoy listening to. The worst thing here is that once again, Neil Morse shows up on vocals.
Throw it away, you don't need it up there. Just remember, you don't look back, whatever you do. Better start doing it right.
It's hard to talk about this kind of cover because I feel somewhat obligated to throw in lots of caveats about the obvious, technical achievement of it, how good it is as a matter of technique. Actually listening to this stuff becomes a little bit enervating in a way, right? Like it's a huge amount of effort and skill and talent directed towards something that feels a little bit pointless. I don't know, maybe I just dislike Neil Morse. Next up in the category of scrupulously faithful covers of prog-era material is the prog-adjacent jam band Phish, who I might very well have ended up a huge fan of if I had had a different college roommate. Now, these guys played Watcher of the Skies at the induction ceremony when Genesis entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The cover itself is very competently done. I do like Trey Anastasio's voice more so than Neil Morse's.
Baby, the lizard shed its tail. This is the end of man's law.
It's not necessarily, once again, something I can imagine really ever listening to for its own sake, but I will give them a little bit of extra credit here for context, right? Because it must have been fairly intimidating to play this really complicated song in front of not just all 5 of the classic members of the lineup, but a room full of other celebrities. If you watch the video of this, there are cutaways to Iggy Pop, Eddie Vedder, Meryl Streep, none of whom seem to give the slightest bit of a shit. I'm not sure if anyone in the whole world cares that much about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but if they were going to put Genesis in it, then it's pretty cool that they allowed Phish to play all of Watcher of the Skies, including that long Mellotron intro, and that the accompanying video is so focused on the early work as well as the later work, and includes Tony Banks describing their big pop hits as not necessarily the work I'm most proud of. I should note that when I was editing this video, I discovered that for some reason I thought that the only song Phish played at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction was Watcher of the Skies. They also did no reply at all.
But I can hear my voice shouting out, but there's no reply at all. Look at me.
It's maybe not the most inspired sounding performance, but it does kind of highlight some of the odd, kind of tricky rhythms and just the ways in which it is a smarter arrangement than you might notice at first. I'm just going to go ahead and lump it in with Watcher of the Skies because most of what's interesting about it, I think, is context more than the content of the actual cover. Next, we have another Jordan Rudess cover. In this case, it's his version of Entangled, which he's rearranged into a classical-style piano instrumental. He's loaded it with a ton of showy little runs and trills like he does, and he's put enough elaborations and variations in it that it takes about a minute in before you'd probably even recognize it as being Entangled if you didn't know what it was. And it's actually pretty cool. I like it. I think it's really pleasing to listen to. This kind of total rearrangement is ultimately a lot more intriguing than his approach with something like Dance on a Volcano of playing the whole song basically straight and then adding a minute or so of really wanky solos at the end. It's really the first thing that we've run into on this list that I can imagine coming back to and listening to on its own terms. Next is Jeff Buckley, who, of course, died tragically while working on an album that would have been called My Sweetheart the Drunk. His demos for that album were released as sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk. Among those are a 4-track cover of Back in New York City.
As I cut the porcupine, he said I had none to blame but me. Held my heart deep in hell, time to shake.
Now, I don't think there's any info available about the thought process behind this recording for obvious reasons, right? It seems fairly clear that he was doing it as a goof. The arrangement is minimal. He leaves out a bunch of the lyrics in what I assume is probably just an oversight rather than a deliberate decision. The last minute and a half are just kind of a noisy 4-track jam that sounds like early Ween. In spite of all that, though, I actually really enjoyed hearing this. This performance has a sense of character that some of the more elaborately faithful covers don't. This seems more like something you'd revisit to hear Jeff Buckley than to hear a great Genesis cover, if that makes sense. But it does demonstrate that he really was a remarkable musician and singer. I say that as somebody who's never even listened to a whole Jeff Buckley. I do have to admit, though, that it feels a little bit parasitic to be hearing something he did in private to amuse himself, and that's only come to light because he died prematurely. That doesn't change the ranking. I've put this pretty high because I genuinely enjoyed it, but, it's something I can't totally get rid of. So this is another emergency reshoot. While editing this video, the YouTube algorithm was kind enough to let me know that Follow You, Follow Me was covered by Red House Painters, a slowcore band I know almost nothing about except that Tim Bowness is a big fan of theirs, and the lead singer seems to generally be regarded as a giant asshole, and they have 10,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, or many, many more than that, rather, enough to qualify for the video. So, it's a really lovely cover. He simplifies the arrangement into kind of an acoustic strum, adds some dissonant guitar noise in the second half, and the texture of his voice plus the noisiness really kind of brings out an underlying melancholy that I don't generally hear in the song. That hint of sadness plus the defamiliarizing effect of it being a different voice actually really made the song hit me in a pretty deep way that it hasn't for a long time.
Though sad and though I'm better for the smile you give, and while I live I will follow.
This is quite excellent, as you can see I'm putting very high. Glad I found it while I was still doing the edit, even though it is a little bit annoying that, the extra material is throwing off the length of the sections. And lastly, we have Cinema Show, covered by the Swedish progressive rock band The Flower Kings. Once again, I've never paid that much attention to The Flower Kings, but I was really pleasantly surprised by how much I liked listening to this. The secret here is that Cinema Show, while it is certainly epic, is also somewhat simpler in its bones than a lot of the other prog-era songs. Especially in the first half, it's a less elaborate piece that gives more room for flourishes in sound and playing.
His basement flat.
The result is something that's still recognizably that song, while also containing a lot of distinct musical and sonic details. It's legitimately enjoyable on its own terms, and it feels like they're living in it as a piece, rather than just, recreating 80% of it and then sticking on a jam at the end. All right, I guess that's it. I'm sure that I must have left out one or two that would qualify under the rules that I've laid out. Let me know in the comments if I did. Other than that, thanks much for your time and attention, and I'll see everyone in a week.
Sun beating down, burning my feet, just walking around.